the general advice I give to young men versus young women. And it goes like this. So, one for men, be the guy you'd want to date. And two for women, give it a chance.
I think the essence of what you're saying is spot on. I would package it a little bit differently. We're finally seeing a lot of women realizing their potential in a way that we hadn't previously.
I'm not suggesting we go back to the 1900s. I'm just saying men haven't kept pace with women the last 30 years. That's just the reality of it. Lakshmi, where does this podcast find you?
I am in my apartment in Brooklyn.
Well, of course you are.
Of course
Of course you are.
Where else would I be?
Yeah, of course. All the cool kids. All right, so let's bust right into it. You've been observing the ways modern relationships have changed for quite some time now. Can you walk us through how you ended up researching this field?
Sure. Well, it was probably like back in like 2009. I was a bartender for most of my life, and then I was a brand strategist. So that's kind of the two sort of, different parts of my life that merged. And I was sort of watching how online dating was changing people. And this is like before Tinder, but I mean, you could already see the effects happening. So I started mapping out the timelines of people who met offline, like met in person. And then I was mapping out the moments of what happened when people, met online. And they were completely different. And so it's not that, meeting people online was like wrong or that it shouldn't happen. It's just that we were starting to lose I would almost call it like a category of relationships that sort of forms over time and over moments. And so those two weren't lining up. And so I noticed that. And I think just like somewhere in my gut, I was like, there's going to be a lot of good things that probably happen from online dating and this industry, and there's probably going to be a lot of not so good things that happen. And I was sort of keeping track of those.
Let's double click on that. And I'll give you, I'm fascinated by what I'll call the mating market. And generally speaking, what the observations I've gleaned is that if you talk to couples in their 60s and 70s, almost all of them will say one was more interested in the other or one wasn't interested in the other in the beginning. So online dating is pretty, two-dimensional. It's the person's appearance and then some kind of top line cliff notes about what I'll call controlled boasting and bullet points. And people make an assumption on if they like them or not, and that's it. Whereas when you're at work with someone, when someone approaches you at a bar or a softball league or a church or a nonprofit, you're hit with not whether I want to mate with this person, but you start an interaction, some sort of social interaction. And smell, vibe, humor, and maybe you decide I'm not romantically interested in this person, but then you see them give a PowerPoint presentation, and you think, wow, she's really smart. I like her body language. Or you say, you get to know a guy and you think, I like the way he treats his parents. And love at first sight is just not that common, but people do fall in love. And so what apps have done is said, unless it's love at first sight, it's not going to happen. And also that it dramatically skews favor or seeds advantage from men to women because men are much less choosy. I think women have a much finer filter for mating because just anthropologically, the downside of sex and pregnancy is much greater for them than it is for a man. And that this has resulted in this massive mating inequality where it's the top 10% of men get a disproportionate amount of the interest. And essentially, it's leaked value or currency. I don't even know if it's leaked from men to women. I'll say it's definitely made it worse for men. So a lot there. Can you respond to where I got it right and wrong there?
Yeah, it's made it worse for everyone in
There
different
you go.
ways.
Yeah.
The thing that I hear you saying, and I think you're right, is what online dating did is it made everyone really, really dependent on whether or not there was like a very quick spark, an immediate spark, and nobody really had the chance to simmer anymore. And so the other thing is that when you spend time on the apps, and again, I think a lot of people think I'm anti-app. I'm not anti-app. I am anti-apps being the dominant form and the way that
You should
everyone.
do it all, right? I mean, put it into the mix, but
You should put it
it
into
shouldn't
the
be the
mix,
only thing.
but I think
Right.
what's hard right now is there just aren't as many places. And so, what I was trying to do, back in the day, I actually did events and I did all these different sort of experiments to see like if I changed the order in which people learned about each other, the information that they were given about each other. If I changed that order, how would that change the trajectory of the relationship? And how would that change how people got to know each other? Could I slow them down? Could I just slow everybody down from the sort of snap judgments and more importantly, what you're describing, which I think is correct, is when you spend a lot of time on an app, that the side of you that is the shallowest, most consumer focused side is the one that comes out. So one of the things I had people do is I said, like, while you're swiping, I want you to talk out loud, kind of share your internal dialogue with me. And as you can imagine, people were like, I am horrified that this is what I'm saying. And this is not how I want to be. And this isn't like the kind of person I would be out in the world. And it's not just the dating apps, it's also the culture of dating, how people advise each other and how people talk about each other. It's like, oh, if you like, why would you go out with someone 3 times? Oh, you're not feeling a spark, you should move on. So there is the dating apps, Scott, but then there's also this bigger way that we talk about how people are supposed to feel and how quickly they're supposed to feel it.
Yeah, I like that. I love the research around, um, think, yeah, verbalize what you're thinking. So I'll put forward another thesis. I'm sure you get asked a lot. I get I get a lot of emails asking for advice. It's usually professional advice, and then it's around things like business school or moving, what I call lifestyle. And I get a lot of people who ask me for dating advice. And I give, I don't mean to, you, you need to ask questions before you give good advice, but I'll be reductive here. And because I do bifurcate the general advice I give to young men versus young women. And it goes like this. And again, I'm very open to coaching here. With young men, I tell them essentially men are metaphorically something like 50% of women say they won't date a guy shorter than them. I believe it's greater than that. It's just an embarrassing thing to say. It makes you sound unkind. But metaphorically, men are getting shorter and shorter. Fewer are going to college. They're not maturing as quickly as they used to, which is strange. They're not socializing as much. And they are becoming less economically, emotionally viable. And some, they're just less attractive to women. And what I tell young men is, okay, it's not about finding the right person, it's about becoming the right person. And then putting yourself in a place to meet somebody, but what is your plan professionally and economically? Physically, without having your mom or a girlfriend nag at you to iron your shirt and take a shower and get in shape and all that stuff. Are you doing that? Are you finding interests that make you a more interesting person? And then we can talk about putting you in a situation, but you want to be the person you'd want to date. And I basically tell young men, you need to get your shit together. And I take time out of their phone. I ask them to give me their screen time and we reinvest it in, I call it money, muscle, and relationships. And I say with women, okay, um, I find the advice I give to them is I don't want to say lower your standards, but be open to the notion that a second coffee on someone that you maybe didn't love, but didn't turn you off might be a good investment. And the reason why is I believe that media and TikTok are essentially constantly feeding women with this notion of you deserve better, leave that guy, or you can have it all. And it creates a set of expectations, whether they're realistic or not. What they do is they reduce the time horizon that you're willing to engage and give a potential relationship an opportunity. So one for men, be the guy you'd want to date. And two for women, give it give it a chance.
So I think the essence of what you're saying is spot on. I would package it a little bit differently. So let's start with what you said about women. And okay, so I know I've heard you say before the Chris Williamson thing, like men are getting shorter and women are getting taller. Is that what you
Taller.
usually say? Yeah.
Yeah, the high he calls it the high heels effect.
Yeah, okay. So here's what I'd say. I completely appreciate that framing. I understand it. It's very provocative. I don't know if it's always useful because I would say, did women get taller or were women finally allowed to grow in the past few decades? Is that what's happened? That we're finally seeing we're finally seeing a lot of women realizing their potential in a way that we hadn't previously.
Yeah,
So
but that's a societal statement. Whatever the reason is, women are more single women own homes than single men now, which is a wonderful thing. I'm not suggesting we go back to the 1900s. I'm just saying men haven't kept pace with women the last 30 years. That's just the reality of it.
right. Sometimes that framing can seem a little bit adversarial. What I would love to see is both in this framework, like both people sort of appreciate the other gender more. And so you said something about like women wanting to, like kind of lowering their standards. And I guess what I would say to that is I would say a little bit, I think there's this idea that, both men and women should in some ways be going out and like trying to find some sort of like the right person or the perfect person. And so what I tell people is instead of thinking about like lowering your standards, like create your standards. Like what is it that is truly valuable to you in a relationship as opposed to what you think is like the right guy or the good enough person or the achievement. I think there's a lot of like this idea that I should achieve a relationship. I should get like this thing that is like a trophy or a prize out there. And in terms of like the height thing, and I think I said this to you before, I know that people say that, and I think part of what the apps do is they prime people to care about things that aren't actually as important once you get to know somebody. So the more that you get to know somebody, the less you may be hung up on something like that. And then I think
Do you
what
think
you're
do you
yeah, go
have
ahead.
any so I just want to do you have any research on that? Because I find that's aspirational. I'd like to believe that's true. The data I've seen does not bear that out. That the dating apps, the dating I'll just give you one piece of data. The stuff I've seen is that a guy who's 6'2" is as attractive and has as much success, everything normalized. A guy who's 6'2", who makes, I think, $60,000 is as attractive as a guy who's 5'8", who makes 120. So you have to be substantially more professionally and economically successful if you're substantially shorter. That height is still, incredibly important, at least on the initial impression.
Yeah, and that's where I'm agreeing with you. And what I'm saying is like on if that's the information that you're presented with, then you're going to weight that more importantly, right? If you're on an app, and most people spend time on apps, so when they're making those decisions, height will factor importantly. And what I'm saying is like when I talk to tons of people that have met, both offline and online, and I have lots of stories of people who, if they met someone in context, then height wasn't as important to them, right? So height becomes more important when we have fewer venues to get to know someone.
And go back to the framing again. A better way around the notion that around the high heels effect that there's a better frame. So I want to acknowledge that it's great and we can celebrate that women have made progress. My sense, though, is that as they have registered that progress, their talent pool or the potential pool of mates in their eyes has shrunk because women mate socioeconomically horizontally and up, men horizontally and down. And because there are fewer and fewer people horizontally and up, that there's just fewer quote unquote viable men in the eyes of women. I mean, one thing whenever I hear a lot about people say, I have a friend, she's wonderful. And I hear this all the time. She's attractive, she's interesting, she's professionally successful, can't find a guy. And my response is she can find a guy, she just can't find a guy she wants to date. And that there is just this chasm, if you will, in, I don't know, expectations, and you can't say to a woman, "Lower your standards." I guess the question is, are we gonna wait for men? Is it about third spaces? Is it about where do you see this all kind of playing out? Because 'Cause I'm worried that we see household formation going down, we see birth rates going down, we see depression and anxiety going up. I think men in their 20s, it registers. I think the lack of mating opportunities really hits men hard in their 20s. I think they lose a lot of self-esteem and they kind of sequester from society. Women are much better at, my sense is, at maintaining social relationships, finding places to receive and give love without necessarily a lot of romantic relationships. Guys are not good at it. Where I see it begin to impact a woman's life is she goes into her 30s and starts to leave her childbearing years and is disappointed that that part of her life gets shut out or is no longer an option. And that weighs on her. And so what I see is a lot of loneliness and a lot of unhappiness. And I'm just trying to figure out. And by the way, I love the fact that you're doing these events. I think that's wonderful. I think the government should literally pay you to do this.
I think that's why I feel so differently about this. I think just because I've done so much on the boots on the ground research as opposed to that I feel like I've witnessed so many different scenarios, and I completely understand and agree with what you're saying. Online dating and all this stuff, it's exacerbated all of the extremes that you're talking about. The side of them that shops on Amazon, the side of them that is a very astute consumer, they're bringing that same side when they're on the app, and that's actually the opposite. That's like the version of you that you don't want on there. And you were saying something about, men and, kind of feeling a little bit, dejected, and I also spend a lot of time talking to Gen Z men because they're very important to my research too. Um, is that I know there's this idea that you have to be like this, high achiever or physically tall or something. The thing that I always saw with women, again in my events when I kind of slowed the process down, is a lot of people what they're looking for is someone who is striving. Right. I think that's captured in what you're talking about. It's not
Has a plan.
necessarily
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
this idea of like you are reaching you haven't you you're reaching into the future and you feel compelled by that future. And that striving could be physical, it could be, professional, it could be like, something that you're trying to learn, a craft that you're trying to master. And I think when people see a person striving, that is incredibly compelling. That is incredibly attractive.
Some of the other, or another thesis I'm curious to get your response to is, I find America becomes more like itself every day, and that is, it is a generous, loving place if you have money. It's a rapacious, violent place if you didn't have money. When I was young and dating, we were all kind of making decent money, but if we pulled it together, my girlfriend, we pulled our money together. We had an apartment. We were building a life together. I wasn't making a lot of money, but it didn't really matter that much. We had kind of a similar life to everybody else. It felt like everybody was sort of kind of middle class. And now there's such a variance in people's income, and money can buy so much now. And so the the life that money offers in America now is the gulf between the life that someone with money can have versus someone who doesn't have money, creates an environment where the amount of money you have, especially as a guy, actually, I'd say only as a guy. The stuff I've seen is that men don't really care if a woman has money. They care if she has her act together and she has a professional interest, but they don't really care about, my sense is, the stuff I've read. Whereas it's becoming so important for women that they naturally gravitate older because the assumption is that person is going to have more money. What are your thoughts?
Okay, I have a couple thoughts on that. One is what people really want, when you really, really break it down is, yes, of course, people are drawn to people that have, money or in their mind, resources and stability is the deeper need.
But let's be specific. I'm not saying people. I'm saying women are drawn to men with more resources.
Okay, so I'll talk then about women because I am that is who I'm referring to. Um, What you really want is someone who is resourceful with what they have. Like, you can see how much money someone has, but what's really attractive is someone's philosophy of money and how they interact with it and how they, like, how it's like a part of their identity. And I think that that piece has kind of gotten lost because of the transactional nature of dating right now. Whereas I think you are correct. People just look at the headlines. Does this person have money? Does this person have not have money? What people I think are actually drawn to is like someone's relationship to money as opposed to how much money they have.
We'll be right back. We've been talking about young people, and older people want relationships as well. And with somewhere between 45 and 55% of marriages ending in divorce and people getting married later, you've done a lot of work that focuses on the later dater, which I hope you've registered and trademarked that. I
I
think that's
did, I
great.
did.
Oh, good for you. Walk us through who that is and the challenges they face and how the dynamics and the atmospherics are different there.
I just sort of noticed that so much of like dating advice and dating content was very centered on the 20 or 30 something who is mostly trying to, secure commitment. And it was almost like a little bit rushed. Like, you got to figure out very quickly if this person is the right person and then move on. And then it kind of jumped to like the golden era, the people that were in the much later years. And I just felt like this middle group was not really being looked at very closely. And so I really wanted to dig in and understand, like, how is dating in this period different? What are the advantages? And also it's a very interesting group of people because it's primarily Gen X. A lot of the people that I work with, this is their first time getting on a dating app, in their 40s or 50s, or in some cases like their early 60s. And so their wiring is fundamentally different. And so it's very interesting to think about what not only how their wiring is different, but also what you want from a relationship in this sort of second chapter. How is that different from what you wanted in the first?
And I mean, I think of Gen X as I'm I'm Gen X. Actually, I'm right on the edge. Would I
You're
call
you're
myself
Gen
Gen
X.
X? Because I'm a narcissist. Thank you for that. But I always describe it as, when I talk about the way I hover over my kids, I would leave my mom's house, my mom, single mother, at 10 a.m. on a Sunday with a Schwinn bike, with a banana seat, and a card that made that rumbling sound, that playing card I would put in the back of the spokes, and then an Abba Zaba bar and 35 cents, and I might be home 14 hours later. I mean, she just had, and so I was more independent. I think I was a little bit more resourceful. I think I was a little bit more resilient, and I think those paid dividends for me later in life when it came to work and dating, et cetera. How does Gen X approach dating? What advice would you have for them, in contrast to the advice you give to younger people?
It's interesting because they're dating on the app. So in some ways they're dating on this platform that wasn't necessarily meant for them, but that's what they have to use too. I think the interesting thing about this group of people also dating at this point in their life is don't necessarily go straight for the commitment, which, kind of sounds counterintuitive, but this is a period of life where people are in many ways what's the most important to them is actually like connection and a degree of curiosity, right? They're in many ways exploring new identities. Like what is attractive to them now? And so I always sort of ask people to like take a step back and say, okay, like this is sort of how you dated in your 20s and 30s, but what do you want now? Because it actually might be different.
It seems to me that young people on the wrong end of this technology revolution is it as bad, worse, not as bad, for Gen Xers, for later daters?
No, I think they're experiencing a lot of the same frustrations. I think what I want them to realize is that because of in some ways like their pre-app wiring that I really want to embolden them to use the apps, but to also use a lot of the sides of them that were forged before the apps. So I think there's a little bit more patience, a little bit more, able to sit through awkwardness, a little bit more like references and life experience, and just a little bit more, stuff that they can tap into and really connect on.
Let's talk a little bit about the LGBTQ market. As someone who works at Prop G, had a great point. And it's one of those things where it hit me in the face. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I'm so fucking tone deaf. And I was saying that men need to approach strangers in a bar, and that's a skill we have to teach people in mating, to approach strangers in a bar and express romantic interest while making them feel safe. And she said, that doesn't work for gay women. Gay women can't go in, unless it's a gay bar, can't necessarily there's just a different level of risk of rejection or a very awkward situation for a gay woman approaching another woman. And, out in the wild, so to speak. And I thought, God, I didn't even think of that. And then I thought maybe that is one place where online dating has been a really strong positive, is it can find people, outside of what you call the normal's the wrong word, but the bulk of the market, such that they can not waste time. They can be a little bit more efficient. What do you see in terms of dating in the LGBTQ market, how it's changed?
I'm not as familiar with that market, but I think everyone has, said that it's brought, a lot of positive things to the LGBTQ community. But just like this is where there's a lot of overlap, is the same thing, is that I think with the speed and the volume and the amount of choices, like that's going to scramble anyone.
As we wrap up here, is there any
Oh, Scott, can we talk about AI?
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, talk about AI.
Yes, AI and dating is here, sometimes as an overlay. So that's already here, right? You can use AI to tweak your pictures, to write your profile, to do the back and forth messaging. And then there's AI as a replacement for a companion. That is, you know, something that is going to be on people's doorstep if it isn't already. I know that there are some benefits to it, but I really want people to understand whether that's something that they want in their lives, and why.
I'll paint the glass half empty. You paint it half full to wrap up on talk about, third places or how we improve things. I am the wrong word is freaked out, but I am hugely concerned that the advances in AI are going to convince men who endure some initial rejection or don't have confidence or don't have economic opportunities to regress to a much more utile, rewarding, low risk, low entry form of porn known as AI. And they're going to start having relationships with AI driven algorithms and sex dolls, never develop the skills, just fall off the map romantically and sexually, and never develop the skills to have a relationship. And that they'll just sequester from society. And unfortunately, with men, when they don't have the prospect of a romantic or a sexual relationship, usually all their other relationships wilt. And then we're just going to have this generation of men trading crypto, playing video games, and having sex with dolls. And I just find it just so incredibly depressing. Your turn.
What I want is I want people to be, like, conscious of consumers in this, because everything that you just said is a very, very real possibility. What you painted is pretty dark. The way that I kind of see how AI and dating could play out would be, something like how we see a stationary bike. Like, right, we've all accepted that there's a stationary bike at the gym, and it's not real, but it's a place to, have a sanitized, safe experience. But you miss out on a lot of things when that's the only form of biking that you know. So I think that there could be, and there's a lot of stuff out there that there are a lot of upsides. Like, people are getting a lot of, having a positive therapeutic experience, with AI companions. But I'm absolutely with you. What like my concern is that such a big part of the human experience is being in relationship. It is experiencing disappointment, heartbreak, and all of the great things that come with a relationship. So much of what it means to be human is to be in relationship with someone that can choose to leave you or stay with you. And an AI cannot do that. An AI has to be with you.
Yeah, as long as your credit card doesn't expire.
Right?
Uh, Lakshmi Rengarajan focuses on the intersection of modern dating and modern work. She previously served as WeWork's director of Workplace Connection and a director of Match Group. Lakshmi has hosted 2 dating podcasts, including Paired by the People and Vox's Land of the Giants. Her latest project and podcast, The Later Dater Today, focuses on reaching those who are dating later in life. She joins us from her home in Brooklyn, New York. Lakshmi, thanks for your good work, and please keep hosting those events.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate it.